and Pete and I just had a great discussion / argument because I accosted you in the aisle. We still need theory, you know, in learning. But it's fascinating to watch the amalgamation of higher education and actual business coming together and talking about what they need, what business needs. And it's been missing for a long time. But I saw a huge gaping hole in this. And I'm going to argue that we should be talking about the future of life and work. Because fundamentally at the base of all this, and I'm going to put on my demographer's hat, I went from being an English major to a statistician to a demographer, which was a weird trajectory. But we're missing people. I didn't hear much talk about people who are making choices to learn a particular occupation, a skill. You talked a lot about passion and work ethic and people who are curious. I thought that was especially interesting because I think most humans, many humans, are just naturally curious about how things work. And thinking about what it is that young people who are replacing a much larger group of old people in the workforce, including me, not you yet. I'm guessing you're 40. Because I do this, I count people and I guess what their ages are and where they sit.
Don't guess mine.
Okay, I won't get you. I don't work at Carnival yet. That might be a new job of the future for me. But thinking about your kids that you were talking about, what they want to do when they grow up, and my kids wanted to be 5 gazillion different things when they were growing up. And I felt my job really was to think about, and this is some of what I got from the earlier session, thank you Scott and the panel. I wanted to focus on opportunity and access, which is what Teresa talked about, and has spent a lot of her life trying to ensure in Indiana, and she used to be my state senator, and also exposure. And I think exposure is something that we really need to give more people, not just by age. I'd like to see us stop thinking about these age silos and talking about millennials. And millennials hate it. My students hate that tag on them. They're people. Start thinking about how is it that we all fit together in this life, future of life and work continuum. So that's kind of the place where I'm coming from after this morning's session.
So exposure and curiosity are 2 things that we need to nurture to some extent, is what you're saying.
Well, and I think that exposing kids to a lot of different types of teaching, learning, work experiences. Has anybody ever taught a class on the nature of... Oops, I needed to finish that question.
Yeah.
Yes, taught a class. Yes, everybody. A class on the nature of work. What is work? Yes, what did you teach?
Work readiness skills, kind of what do you want to be when you grow up, and how would you get there, work ethics, communication, leadership, and teamwork.
How old were they?
17 and 19.
Okay, so they're in the high school range?
Yeah.
That's fantastic, because most schools don't talk about work. They don't teach work. It's not in the curriculum. Are there any colleges here? ISU, yes. Pardon?
Pkwy.
Okay, and do you have classes on the nature? What does it mean to work in today's society?
I shouldn't speak for Pkwy. I personally talk a lot about career exploration and how to figure out using your values and your skills and interests and skills, especially values, how you decide the kinds of things you
But do you actually talk about what it's like to go into work every day and based on the kind of job that you might have, Think about the President of the United States. Who teaches anybody to be President of the United States? But try to think about, and regardless of the White House right now, I think we have an idea about that. But we really don't talk about what people do every day. When I got up this morning, I didn't go to my office as I usually do. I came to a conference. That's what we all did. And throughout my year, my work is a lot of conferences, speaking, teaching, talking to people. Your work may be very different, and you may be sitting at a desk more often, or you might know people who are actually out fixing those potholes right now. I think a lot about the nature of work and what it is for those people who are faced with angry residents today, because we're driving like drunk people on our roads trying to avoid potholes. And I'm thinking about where are all those people who are filling the potholes? Where are the people who are making the materials to fill the potholes? Where are the people coming up with science to come up with road coatings that are going to withstand our crazy Indiana weather? Their work to me is a continuum of people, from young to old, who have a variety of skills, many of which may change throughout their lifetime. And when we talk about the future of work and how automation affects that, and I think our first question was, how much will it impact the lives and jobs? 100%. That's my answer. 100%. It already has. When I grew up, we were going to go into a paperless society. Does anybody remember that? Paperless. How much paper did I print? Some articles I've written for you to take today. We still need paper because it's highly portable. We still need people because they are quite agile. You know, we saw the video with the thing that looked kind of like a dog insect walking through the door. And we could have gotten through that door much faster. I think that our jobs are going to evolve where technology takes over a lot of what I call, and this is a technical term that I actually did learn in college, crap. It's going to take over a whole lot of crap work that we do, and it's already starting to do that.
I don't transcribe interviews anymore.
Pardon?
I don't transcribe interviews.
Yeah, absolutely. And so thinking about how these things are going to change us, also keep in mind our labor force is shrinking because our population is not growing as fast as it used to. This is certainly true in Indiana. We just released our latest population projections that we do 2 or 3 times between the censuses. And with a declining population, and as more of us retire out of the workforce, isn't it kind of good that some of these jobs are going to be automated? It's not a chicken little, the sky is falling. It's that humans are incredibly adaptable. And I strongly believe that Hoosiers in particular, because we're very practical people, we are starting to evolve what we are learning and doing to account for some of that. And I certainly see it in the kids in their 20s, whom we have taught to learn to hate school and work. They think school is boring and work is awful. I'm just passing this along to you. This is what I hear from kids. And there's nothing worse for them than thinking about having a boring job. Sorry for my diatribe.
That's fine. But wait, how much, when do we get to end this panel? I didn't time. Do you know? Okay. So kids are turned off by schooling, and I'll give you a little anecdote right before I alluded to this in a big talk, but we just did something crazy with our 12-year-old who was not doing well in elementary school. She hated it. She was absolutely obstinate. She would not do her homework, and she was having a hard time with the other girls in school. And maybe this was the wrong choice. We don't know. We'll find out. But we took some inspiration from Ted Dintersmith and some other people who are education scholars, and we did what we could afford. We sent her to a Sudbury school. Does anybody know what a Sudbury school is? Scott knows what a Sudbury school is. Sudbury school is basically like there's no school. You come to school every day and you figure out what you want to learn about, what you want to do. You take the books down, you read them when you want to read them. You create your own program. You follow your curiosity. She's in 6th grade. We figured, you know, if she does this for a few years, even the stakes are pretty low. But what was important to me was that she wasn't turned off to the whole schooling process, especially at a school that sees itself as a blue ribbon school or the public school that you would go to, and where the teachers are basically hammering information down their throats constantly. So we took this radical option. It was certainly something different. Her brother, who was more studious, absolutely wanted nothing to do with it. But it's working for her, and in the process, she's learning about certain things. A big part of that school experience is justice. So every day, we have the Justice Committee gets together, and the students basically work out all their own problems. If another student pushes another student on the playground, if one student insults another, that the offended student can write a complaint. They go to the Justice Committee, a bunch of students talk out the situation, and then they decide on some sort of restorative process for the wronged student. She's also seen how a process like that can be weaponized. So, you know, what you've seen in colleges with some of that sort of situation. The other thing about it that's interesting, I don't know, I lost my train of thought. Anyway, I'll bring up. The other thing that's interesting about it is that this school was founded by 2 people, husband and wife team. They got divorced in the process. The students voted the guy off the island. They said, "We don't want you a part of our school anymore. You're out." And so he left. He was the founder of the school, and he was forced to leave. So the students have a lot of power then. And that's interesting to put in the hands of a 12-year-old. So we want to talk about automation, soft skills. What do you think? Machines coming for the jobs? We have a number of questions up here. These are just basically the spur discussion. They're not.
I guess not so much a question, but a statement that kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier about humans being naturally curious. And I would agree with you on that, but to go back to your point of allowing students to fail and teaching them that it's okay to be wrong, teaching them to accept that they may ask a question, they may follow their natural curiosity, and they may get bricked off. They may be told, no, you're not following the right path by someone who knows more. And we have to make that okay so that we don't squelch that curiosity and make them afraid to ask questions. Because I think that's what's happening, more so than a lack of curiosity.
Well, it's a balance with students, and in my experience with adult students, I call them adults. They're 18, 19-year-olds. They have to take my class. So I am a captain. There's nothing better than a required class to make sure that they show up. But what's interesting is that they simultaneously want micro direction and no direction. And this is so young person-like. And so as much as I was thinking about, oh God, maybe my kids would have liked a school like that where they could write all the rules, I also suddenly pictured what you whispered, I think so, Lord of the Flies. He brought up that book. And there is that kind of balance that you have to pay attention to the student. I think the challenge we have is that we have systems in place to teach the many. Right, Dave? Mind trust in the back. To teach the many is very efficient, it's very practical, and it can also be very stultifying. And how do we get that exposure to kids to those kinds of environments based on the style of their kind of learning? It's hard to do, and if every kid had a tutor like they did in the Renaissance, where people read and spoke 6 languages because Queen Elizabeth of England had her own private tutor for 10 or 15 years, yeah, a lot of kids could probably do really well. Can we afford that? No.
Well, the school system was created in the industrial era to train them for industry. And you should check out, if you haven't seen it, John Gatto's essay for Harper's. It came out 12, 13, 15 years ago, called Against School. You can look it up on the internet. It's on, on Google to find it. It's a fascinating piece. Go ahead.
I was going to say, this goes along with it, and this is, all you said you didn't do enough controversy. I'll inject the controversy. Time magazine had an article, probably 15 years ago, about, and they compared American 18-year-olds to other industrialized nation 18-year-olds. And pick your ugly adjective. They said the Americans were the laziest, they did, pick your ugly adjective. They then followed those kids, this was a long study, a sociology study, and compared the American 30-year-olds, same 30, kids that had been 18, to the same kids that had been 18 in France or Germany or whatever. And the Americans were the most hardworking, entrepreneurial, pick your good adjective. And so the question was asked, what happens to those 18-year-olds that were lazy, blah, whatever, to 30, to change them, to take them from so lazy to so hardworking, etc. And their hypothesis was the 4 institutions that take them, and they did the 4 writ large, that were higher ed, that could be anything from truck driving school to, higher ed, 4-year college, the military, factory, and service jobs, meaning working at Penny's or whatever. They just don't tolerate what high schools tolerate. You're gone, you're late 3 days to the factory, you're gone. You didn't do this, you're gone. You didn't make the grades, you're gone. And so they say, this was their premise, was that changed those kids so much. Now, you got a limited population and you got, all sorts of statistical problems with selection bias and everything else. But it was an interesting article to think about, that the Americans were, by definition, lazy and then not lazy 12 years later.
Well, they grew up. They matured. They found out.
But the French should have grown up also. The German,
But the French have a different labor culture. And lots of businesses, any business person here in this room would hate how the French rules. They don't allow for that churn that is what really makes a lot of our businesses successful. That you don't live up to what your requirements are, you're gone, and we'll replace you. Part of the challenge is replace you with who next. But the other issue, I think, is that young people, once they figure out what they really want to do in life, and figure out what their lifestyle is going to be like. We built an application in our center called In Reality, where we take students, and a lot of high schools use this, you go through and you build your own budget. And you figure out what kind of lifestyle, and you would be amazed. We watch how they go back. First they pick the expensive apartment, the expensive car, the expensive entertainment package, you name it, and then they realize how much money they have to make and how long they would have to go to school to become a neurosurgeon in order to make the amount of money. And they go back to square one and they start reducing their idea, oh, maybe I only need a studio apartment. I don't need to go to Harvard. I can go to Purdue or to WGU, Indiana, which I saw on their sign was a great bargain. They start learning what's going to circumscribe them in certain ways. And I do think they have to come to that on their own and not have their parents really dictating what it is that they're going to do in life. Are you going to tell your kids what they should be studying in college?
What they should study in college?
Yeah.
No. I wasn't a great high school student.
We're the land. He's here from Ball State. David Letterman, okay, C student, right? Look at.
I want Nate Turner to talk a little bit about failure and work ethic and bringing up kids a little bit. Yeah. Can you? Can you mention some of the things that we just
So I had a good fortune of just having the chance to talk to Mr. Carlson a minute ago, and I said I'm a parent, so that's the group I represent. And in the introduction of this program, there was no mention of parents. We talk about business people, we talk about community people, et cetera, but we don't talk about parents. And all of the statistical information, all the scientific data we know, we find out that the most important 1,000 days of a child's life are those first 1,000, and those 1,000 days are spent with their parents. And we talk about education and talk about the future of work, but we don't talk about the foundation, those first 1,000 hours. We have Lamont's classes, but we have no classes for parents. When I became a father, I had a difficulty figuring out how to put a car seat in, much less how to be a parent, right? But the world moves so fast today that parents need some guidance and direction. So I was telling Mr. Carlson that before my son was born, before we were having, we wrote to Harvard for an application. Yes, we really did. It's because all education is not the same. And we figured all education is not the same, we might as well reach for the stars. That's what we're all told to do. So we got an application from Harvard, and we created a template for his life, and we now use it to teach other parents how to create a template for their life. Because we keep hearing about education, but nobody tells us what school we want our children to go to. And so I'm from a community, I'm from Gary, Indiana, so I'm from a community that more often than not, people say go to college, but by the time you're a 10th grade or 11th grade, you're so unprepared that if someone had done something during those first 1,000 days, we'd be better off. When my son was 16, he was fluent in 4 languages because we were preparing him for global society. He tested in the top 1% in math and science. He applied to 31 of America's top colleges and universities. He was accepted to 27. But he chose not to go to college because he wanted to chase his dream of playing professional soccer. So he moved to Brazil, and he played soccer in Brazil, and traveled to Germany, had trials in Germany, and in the UK. Then he had a concussion and said, you know what, I had enough of that. I'm going to come back home. I'm going to go to school. So he's finishing his senior year at Santa Clara University. And next fall, he'll begin a PhD program at Carnegie Mellon in computer science and electrical engineering. That would not have happened if we listened to everybody else and were not participants in our own children's lives. Or if we let other people decide what was best for our child at these kind of events. So is that sufficient?
Yeah, so what we were sort of dancing around, I think, in the panel, and you and I got to it more directly afterwards, is that we had this conversation about about the workplace and school, but we don't talk about all the other social needs that we need in order to fix what's happening on Keystone or in West Baltimore or wherever, in rural Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky. So what do we do about that? I mean, if we're talking about failure, we're talking about the change that's coming. How do we address that?
Well, one
And I'm asking anybody. You can say it, but I mean,
in the industrial education, where 30% of what it is that we're doing is that population, and 30% is falling through the cracks. And 30% don't even belong in our schools because they're way too bright. They're beyond our school system because the school system is letting down.
Well, I think you're kind of getting on one of the questions that's on the next slide, where can we reconsider the timing of higher education or post-secondary, which sounds a little less intimidating to people? How can we adjust that timing, and how do we adapt to churn in the workforce? And churn is going to be me migrating through a bunch of different jobs. We don't exist in a time where you went to work for GM or Ford forever. My grandparents did that. The companies that they worked for, my grandmother worked for Warner in Chicago. My grandfather worked for U.S. Steel in Gary, and we lived in Gary. Beautiful city. It needs renovation. It's ready. I want Bill Gates or Tim Cook or somebody to buy Gary, and it's a great place. But we are committed to our employees. We are not loyal the way that we used to be, and nor are the employees themselves feeling any kind of attachment. Now, you've been at Quantico since 1999, so obviously you've got commitment and a bond there. But for so many workers, that really does not exist. And work workers today and students today and people today need to do what you were talking about, make an investment in yourself. You invested in your son before he was born. I think that's an amazing story. And you created a template that he could work with as you were raising him. Most parents really, I never, no, I wish I had. But my son is fine, he's grown up, he's going to do okay. But we need to think about how do we make learning something that you do all the time. This started back in the 40s, the 50s, the 60s. It used to be called lifelong learning. Everybody ignored it. We're still talking about lifelong learning. Employers want it because employers need us to keep engaging, to get those new, different skills, whether it's upskilling or just different skilling. But we're always engaging with those institutions. The institution I work for, Indiana University, is very similar to many others. How many of you have executive education programs? Okay, why don't we have adult education, although that's got kind of a bad name, doesn't it, Teresa? You know, adult education means you didn't finish high school. But in reality, adult education should be that I'm going to go back to one of these institutions. We have 70 amazing institutions of higher education in the state. We are the second highest importer of freshmen who come to Indiana, and that's why we're not doing so bad stuff, because we import them all from New Jersey. Well, New Jersey doesn't have our kind of college system. But the reality is that we've got to figure out how to pass people into and out of constantly through these. And the impediments to that are a lot of red tape and paperwork. And money is there, but I think money is more surmountable than the pain in the neck amount of time it takes to actually contact and get engaged with somebody that's going to talk to you at one of these universities. Most of them are still looking at the young puppies or the older middle management who wants to become CEO.
I love that comment because I do think that we have to rethink learning, and it shouldn't be just, okay, now we're going to have a K-12 or P-12, and then we're going to have higher ed. Well, then businesses are saying we still have learning needs. So learning has got to be continuous. So I think we have to look at changing our culture and figuring out a different way. And I was telling a couple of people, the reason that I came today is because I'm doing research on the future of work, and I'm creating a certificate program around this future of work with the culture of learning. And it is amazing, the people that between higher ed and business, because I can't do it without business, but I need, I work in higher ed, but we have to work together. And it shouldn't be higher ed over here and business over here. We have got to figure it out together. And we've got to break down some of our silos, because there are a bunch of silos that we've got to create a different way of looking at learning. So I just attended a conference in San Diego on the future of the workplace experience, and IBM was there, and they have certificates and badges and all of these different things. Why are we not thinking about learning and getting experience in different ways? So I should be able to go to an internship and get an experience and maybe a badge that might mean something, and maybe all those will bundle together as a degree. But we have to look at things differently.
That is underway. I mean, Northeastern just said that they're going to accept IBM badges for college credit, and it's probably going to go the other way, too. College credit will be accepted by IBM. Go ahead.
I'm an extrovert, so I'm formulating my ideas as I speak.
Okay.
I also, my background is in psychology, so I'm looking at what motivates us. And when we talk about what this is, this work thing, not all compliance is bad compliance. At some point, there's an individual has to decide if they're going to comply with a certain set of rules or standards to be productive in that environment. All right. that brings me backing up a little bit about how do we go through the process of helping students define for themselves where their walls of compliance are. It's great for my child to come out thinking that she could really do anything that she sets her mind to. That's just not true. She has talents and gifts in certain areas and not others. She's not going to be able to go out there and just do anything she wants. But the value of knowing who I am, where I'm able to go, and what I can do with that. And maybe that's part of this restructuring of education. Rather than one size fits all, can we provide various opportunities and then help the students? Maybe that's what your daughter's doing, is find that pathway that makes the most sense to him or her.
Finding a pathway that makes more sense to her, which doesn't have on the other side of it, is the failure, which is also helpful in honing one's view of what you're able to do and what you're really not able to do.
Yeah, but even in failure, the question is, and this goes back to appreciative kind of inquiry, is what, not that you failed or what made you fail, but what did you learn from that failure, because we all fail.
Sure.
And then what are you going to take with that moving forward? What boundaries does that set on you?
Sure.
You know, what's the reality that's helping you to understand about yourself?
Yeah. In her case, the stakes they aren't as high as her brother's. I mean, if her brother fails, there's really something to that. In her case, there's no grades and there's no, she could go on for a while and not realize what she's not good at. Hopefully she'll just pursue what she's actually interested in, and then that will, the work what she's interested in will drive her to success. I mean, it's a theory. We'll see if that works.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
I just wanted to see if we could spend some time addressing the second bullet point.
Sure. So it needs to be considered a timely structure of college education to adapt to churn in the workforce. How college business models have to change to offer continuous retraining and/or updates to a college degree. One of the things that didn't come up in the discussion, but I found out about it when I had the pre-calls with all the panelists, is that, and sorry, you saw a mantle earlier today. Sue from Ivy Tech was supposed to be on the panel, but she had to drop out. So, but what she made, the point that she made during our call was that, yes, it's great to have opportunities to retrain people who've been laid off from jobs in manufacturing or wherever. What she was hoping for was more of a proactive situation where she can find out ahead of time, oh, this industry is sort of declining, we're going to need to move into there and create programs that sort of bring people in. So I'm just offering that out. Anybody want to talk a little bit about the second?
Well, maybe that's part of this paradigm too, is in teaching people about work, how do you access the information that helps you understand what the future of work is? And can we build that into education? We know where to look, and we know what data is out there, and you don't have to have an advanced degree just to read an article that gives you some projection of some sort. Is that part of this process?
For students.
I know in my previous hat in another institution outside the state, when we did a lot of bullet points in number 2, is all about curriculum alignment. Curriculum alignment, specifically student learning outcomes aligned with specific job description. So therefore, looking to not just look at a particular course, but also courses within a particular program, degree, or certificate or something of that nature. And just make sure that for a particular job description or descriptions plural in that pathway, that we partnered with particular industry partners to really make sure that we were hitting our student learning outcomes were equivalent or the same as those specific job expectations, job skill sets. So that's been kind of the model lately in career track. I'm not sure if that is the wave of the future. I believe it has something to do with that. as far as preparing students for actual jobs, but not necessarily future jobs. More so what you were beginning to allude to. What happens if they're about to phase out those jobs, or if you see robotics and things of that nature? How do we make that shift, and how do we get corporations and companies and small businesses to partner with us ahead of time so that we can make innovations in curriculum that way? I just want to hear a little bit more discussion.
Well, one of the things that we know is that over the past 40 years, our economy has flip-flopped from making things, you know, my little thing was actually made over in China. From making things to providing service to people. I've got a chart, I've got a few articles here, you can take copies. But if you can see the yellow and the blue is making stuff, the yellow is providing services to people. And so services constitute people doing something for other people. Whether you're an attorney who eventually became president of a university, I thought it was interesting that he was a trial lawyer. That's probably a good experience, working with a board of trustees and chairman, being able to argue effectively. As we flip-flop, we also know that in the next 20 years, based on best data available, things do change, disasters happen, new technologies come out. But the number one job that we project for Indiana is recreational therapist. And we don't mean by recreational that we're going to teach you how to play volleyball, but actually people who are providing physical therapy to people, both in the context of athletics, but also after injuries, people who are getting old. Second up is first-line supervisors of mechanics and installers and repairs. And why would that be? Because you need somebody to watch what they're doing. I want somebody to watch really carefully how that Southwest Airlines plane that I'm going to catch tomorrow morning, how that is being repaired, right? Where, you know, that's health and safety. Emergency management directors. Are you getting a thread here? Mental health and substance abuse. What's one of the biggest problems facing us right now? A lot of our potential workforce isn't in the workforce or isn't doing as well in the workforce because of opioid addiction. Audiologists, that's because I may lose my hearing at some point and I'm going to need help. Orthotics, and not making the orthotics, but actually fitting them and doing the surgery. Healthcare social worker. You get the drift. It's about people, it's about their bodies. A lot of it is about the physicality. It's not about fixing the robot. It's about repairing and helping the human. And so a lot of our work is really going to shift off into that area, even as we become incredibly productive in manufacturing. We are more productive per worker than we have ever been. I mean, there's amazing science that has gone into reducing the number of steel workers up in Northwest Indiana, cutting that in half during and after the recession, and yet producing more steel than ever. We have put our brains to work. We're also going to need to put our brains to work for, what did I say at the beginning? I think I talked about, let's make this about people, because it's the people who are going to work and who are going to do stuff for us.
Well, in terms of, new training to work with people, and Pete, you might have something to say about this, but another skill that might be useful is people who are being downsized, outsized, whatever. How to sell yourself, how do you market yourself. That's a huge.
I thought you didn't want to be a salesman.
I didn't, but you know what? If it's in the genes, it's
I mean, I think the currency that you're talking about is hope. If you don't have hope, then you don't have a dream. You don't have a reason to pursue anything. I work with District 26, which is our career technical education center in Anderson, just as a volunteer. Every semester, second semester, the advanced manufacturing students there do a hovercraft project. They actually build a hovercraft that can carry a person, and then they use electric lawn leaf blowers and fans, and they design this thing to kind of cruise across a concrete floor. It's not super difficult, but it's really fun. And I went in there earlier this semester and was helping some of these teams. And a couple of the students were just sitting there doing absolutely nothing. And some of the students were really excited and really engaged. And this was the day we were actually going to get the craft off the ground. Like it was going to hover, an inch off the ground or whatever. And 2 or 3 of them were just kind of sitting with their head in their hands. And one of them just walked out in the middle of the class and like, what did you get? So he checked himself into day detention class, whatever. Like they go to this detention lab, I guess they call it, where they can just go and cool their heels. Yeah. So they basically put himself in detention instead of working on a hovercraft, which everybody else was excited about. And it just brought it home to me. It's like, you could create all the coolest programs in the world. It's excite and attract everybody. But if they have no hope, if they have no intrinsic hope, then how do you stir that? So, I've been racking my brain because I get paid to innovate stuff. And I try to create projects that students want to be part of. And if they have no hope, it doesn't matter how shiny the object. They'll turn to opioids. They'll turn to an escape. They'll turn to something. And it may be because of what's going on at home. It may be because of whatever else is going on there. We have to be about a currency of hope. Without that, nothing else that you can plan or hope for matters, because it still takes someone that, hope inspires inspiration. Hope inspires innovation. Hope inspires curiosity. And then curiosity inspires a vision, and a vision inspires a direction. And then a direction inspires a work ethic and a reason to want to pursue something. But if you don't have that seed of hope to start with, you're in trouble. And I fear that our state, culturally, we have always had a lot of hope, and we have a good work ethic, and we have, by and large, decent family culture, family-friendly culture, I should say. But we're losing some of that, and it's slipping away, and I don't know what to do about it, to be honest. And I would just put that question out there, like, how do we bring hope into, super low unemployment, so the numbers don't necessarily point to a lack of hope. But if we're going to take risks and try some things, now's the time to do it. Not when we're in trouble. Now. And I don't know, voice crying in the wilderness sometimes. But
I think some of what we're seeing, though, with that, is that we're seeing that inevitable clash of the old and the new. There is change. There is this chasm that people say. I noticed there's a miles-wide rift that's occurring in the continent of Africa. And that in 1,000,000 years it might split apart. And yet they were telling people they should start preparing now. Okay, I don't plan that far ahead. Many people see this risk. They see automation as a scary thing. If you watched or read Stephen Hawking, many of his comments over the past year have been about artificial intelligence potentially destroying us. There's a lot of fear about what technology might do to us, what it may have already done to our children. And I think some of that lack of hope in some places is that fear of change. I would argue that in Indiana, we have always figured out very practical ways to deal with change. In the 1850s, we wrote a new constitution. Can you tell I like history? We wrote a new constitution that included that we couldn't go into debt. Why was that?
Canal.
The canal, I love you people. Oh, well, everybody knows this. You read Jim Madison. But that was an incredible learning experience for Hoosiers, for Hoosier lawmakers. And one of the downsides of it is that it made Hoosiers risk averse. You talked earlier about risk stuff, and that is an important thing. I think I'm feeling very hopeful about Hoosier future because I see thousands of people in the state hugging technology change, embracing artificial intelligence, wanting to learn the new and the different, and understand how it works. The folks who are frightened, that's going to be more difficult, but I think we're going to start seeing them move along that path where one year you see one car, and was it the next year? You only saw one horse. To me, the buggy whip is a great example of a job that went away, but it didn't mean all the buggy whip makers didn't find some meaningful work and take care of their family. We're resilient. I think we will do it. And I take heart, and I'll send you a link to this article where I link to another thing. It's a tool called Will Your Job Be Done by a Machine? You type in the job, and it'll tell you in a percentage that if you want to be a bank teller, you have a 98% chance that that job's going to be gone. Not just in 10 years, but probably this year. I think they're talking about replacing ATMs now with phone things where you can get cash. So I do think I think that it's that natural clash that we're seeing.
Just a word about, we're recovering career counselor, a word about micro change. And we used to do workshops for people who were in job change, and we tended to talk in kind of big terms. Finding yourself and doing the things that excite you and so on. All good things. And one of the pushbacks we consistently got was, but I need to do something now. And from my own experience in private and higher ed, I think one of the things that ties together several themes that you all have touched upon, curiosity, hope, being able to market yourself, an awareness both of the structure of where you work and of what's going on around you. And whether you keep it on a computer or just keep aware of it yourself, a constantly updated inventory of what you can do. Years ago, when the telecom industry was outplacing people, one of the consultants that came in said, consider putting your resume on your business card. What do you mean by that? What do you know how to do? 3 to 5 bullet points. Have you ever led a project? Then you can do project management. Have you ever done advising? Then you can do advising. And knowing how, this happened to me a few years ago, my old job went away. And there was a related but different job right next to it. And the question came, well, we need someone to do this other thing. Okay, fine, I'll do it. You feel okay with that? Yeah, I know basically this stuff is done. I'm aware of the environment. And by the way, these are people that were going to make the decision. So that kind of savvy, to use the word, critical thinking and awareness and curiosity so that you can be your own marketer, even if you couldn't sell ice water to someone in the desert. That kind of ability to articulate what you can do.
Yeah. So just a couple of things on what I've heard. We just got, someone came to the back door.
That was it, the 5-minute break?
Yeah. You know, as far as technology goes, you talked about tellers. You know, they thought tellers were going to go away with the ATM, and it turned out that the bank branches expanded and there were more tellers hired. But the teller's job changed. It became more about sales rather than about just sort of distributing money. One thing about technology is that all the technologists, all the AI people say, well, it will lead to more. It will ultimately lead to more jobs. The thing is it's not necessarily going to lead to more jobs in the same industry. It's not necessarily going to lead to more jobs in the same place, and it's not necessarily going to lead to more jobs at that time, maybe 10, 20 years down the line. And one of the things we have to struggle with here, we've done stories about steel workers in Baltimore who try to re-educate themselves, as Bethlehem Steel kind of goes away and that work goes away. And at some point, some of these folks just sort of ossify, and they're not able to adapt, and they have a hard time getting through college. And it doesn't really have anything to do with the amount of time or the money. There's time, there's space for them to learn. There's just kind of a lack of flexibility there for whatever reason. And I'm wondering how that's going to play out.
Like I have an example that one of my family members, a week ago, worked at the Chicago Tribune. 18 years old, he worked there, he's in his 50s now. He goes to work, he gets everything signed, he's a supervisor, and they walk him out. He goes to work and they say, "This is your last day." He had no warning. Chicago Tribune just laid off so many people. And now, like you said, it's hard to get hope again. He's like, never gone to college.
Well, one thing, there's a lot of talk about the liberal arts or English degrees, media, journalism losing their jobs. I think one of the things that I find to be telling about it is that maybe the name English is not a good name, or liberal arts is not a good name, because we don't actually know what that is. But maybe it's something where we talk about the fact that it's about communication and that people are actually producing content, or they know how the content gets produced, because we are living in an age of this enormous content ingesting monster called 7 billion people. And we are all being constantly entertained or in some way engaged with content via these devices. And yet we never talk about the high articulate people who actually help us with that content. I'm going to argue that we need more of those articulate people than ever before, because they have to be able to communicate as they're selling or providing service or making content, and those jobs are increasing. How do we get out of these boxes, though, of thinking that it's newspapers or it's TV? Does TV really exist that way anymore? The way that it used to? It's all transmogrified, and people will find their niche if we can teach them the right skills.